The morning shift began like any other in the Galactic Council headquarters. The massive station floated in neutral space, a symbol of unity among the stars. Inside, thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds worked together. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Velcros arrived at his office early. As chairman of the council, he took pride in being first. The reptilian diplomat enjoyed the quiet hours before the chaos began. He made his rounds through the diplomatic quarters, nodding to the few staff members already at their posts. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the human section. The doors were open. That was the first strange thing. Human Ambassador Jiwan always kept them secured until her team arrived. Velcro stepped inside and felt his scales prickle with unease. The office was clean, too clean. Desks were empty except for neat stacks of data cards and access badges. Every piece of human equipment had been removed. The walls showed pale squares where pictures and certificates had hung for years. Velcros picked up one of the data cards. It contained transfer codes for the systems the humans had been managing. Nothing more. No letter of resignation. No explanation. No goodbye. He checked the timestamp. The files had been created at midnight station time. He rushed to the communication center and demanded they contact the human embassy on the station's residential level. The response came quickly. The embassy was empty. Completely evacuated. Security footage showed the humans leaving in groups throughout the night. They had taken personal belongings, but left everything official behind. They walked to their ships with calm faces. No hurry, no drama. They simply left. Velcros ordered a system-wide check. The reports came flooding in over the next hour. Every human settlement in Council space was abandoned. Research stations empty. Trading posts closed. Embassy buildings locked and cleaned. 47 human facilities across 20 systems, all evacuated within the same 12-hour window. It was impossible, yet it had happened. The council members gathered for an emergency session. The chamber buzzed with confusion and speculation. Velcro stood at the center platform and explained the situation. Silence followed his words. Then the room erupted. Good riddance, Councillor Threxus announced, his insectoid mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The humans were always too emotional, too unpredictable. They never quite fit in with civilized society. Several members voiced agreement. Others looked uncertain. Velcros noticed that no one seemed particularly worried. The humans were a small faction, newer to the galactic stage. Their departure was unusual, but hardly catastrophic. At least, that's what everyone assumed. They contributed to several important projects, Councillor Meraxis pointed out, though her tone suggested mild inconvenience rather than concern. We'll need to reassign their duties. The council formed committees. They discussed redistribution of human territories. They debated who would take over various programs. The meeting had the energy of bureaucrats solving a scheduling problem, not leaders facing a crisis. Velcros tried to shake his growing sense of dread, but couldn't identify its source. In the days that followed, workers began cataloging what the humans had left behind. The documentation was perfect. Every system, every procedure, every protocol was carefully recorded. The humans had even labeled which files were most critical. It was almost as if they wanted to make the transition easy. Kyung, a station master at one of the major trade hubs, reviewed the last human transmission from his facility. Engineer Hyun-woo had sent a complete handover package. The file contained thousands of pages of technical specifications. Kyung tried to read through it and felt his confidence drain away. The systems were far more complex than he'd realized. The humans had made it look simple. Did you know they were managing the entire logistics network for this sector? His assistant asked, staring at a screen full of routing algorithms. Kyung hadn't known. He suspected no one had known. The humans had simply done the work without fanfare. Now, he was looking at mathematical formulas that made his head hurt. He sent a request to the council for expert assistance. Similar requests were flooding in from stations across council space. Public reaction was mixed. Some species celebrated the human departure. Ancient prejudices surfaced. Humans were too aggressive, some said. Too strange, said others. Too young to be playing in the big leagues. The common sentiment was that the council would be better off without them, but a few voices expressed concern. A medical administrator on Talos 4th pointed out that the human-designed patient transport system had saved thousands of lives. A teacher on Vorkus mentioned how human educators had revolutionized their curriculum. These comments were drowned out by the louder voices, insisting nothing important had been lost. Velcros spent hours reviewing old council sessions. He watched footage of G1 presenting proposals. She always spoke clearly and passionately. He noticed how other council members would check their devices while she talked, how they'd interrupt her mid-sentence, how votes on human initiatives always failed, sometimes unanimously except for humanity's single vote. He found a recording from 2 years ago. G1 had proposed expanding refugee protections in the Outer Rim. She'd shown data proving that thousands of displaced beings needed help. The vote had been 53-1 against. The discussion had lasted less than 10 minutes. Councillor Threxis had called it misplaced sentiment before moving on to the next agenda item. Velcros watched G1's face in that moment. She'd nodded slowly and sat down. Her expression hadn't shown anger or frustration. Just a quiet, tired acceptance, like someone who'd confirmed something they'd already suspected. 2 weeks after the departure, Velcros stood at an observation deck. The space lanes outside stretched into infinity. Human ships had once been common sights here. Their distinctive designs easy to spot. Now there were none. It was as if they'd never existed. A junior diplomat approached him. "Chairman, the trade reports are showing some irregularities. Several shipping routes are experiencing delays." "How severe?" Velcros asked. "Not catastrophic yet. But the automated systems the humans maintained are starting to malfunction. We're working on it." The young diplomat left. Velcros remained at the window. He thought about the empty offices, the perfect documentation, the calm, organized departure. The humans hadn't stormed out in anger. They hadn't made demands or threats. They'd simply packed their things and left like guests who'd realized they weren't actually welcome. That frightened him more than any declaration of war ever could. An angry enemy might return. An insulted ally might seek revenge. But the humans had done something far more final. They'd walked away with the quiet dignity of people who'd given up on something they once believed in. Velcros didn't know it yet, but he was standing at the edge of a revelation that would shake the council to its core. The humans hadn't just left. They'd removed themselves from a machine they'd been holding together. And now that machine was beginning to fall apart. 3 weeks had passed since the humans left. The Galactic Council convened for what they called a comprehensive review of the situation. The Grand Chamber was full. Every member species had sent representatives. The mood was surprisingly light, almost celebratory. Councillor Meraxis stood to address the assembly. Her crystalline form reflected the chamber lights as she spoke. The human departure, while unexpected, presents opportunities. Their territories are now available for redistribution. Their projects can be properly managed by more experienced species. I propose we view this as a natural correction. The chamber filled with approving sounds. Clicks, hums, and chirps of agreement echoed off the walls. Several councillors nodded their various forms of heads. Velcros watched from his central position and said nothing. His unease had grown into something darker, but he couldn't yet put words to it. Threxis took the floor next. His speech was longer and more pompous than necessary. Let us be honest among ourselves. The humans were never truly compatible with council standards. They were too driven by emotion, too chaotic in their thinking. Their departure proves they recognize their own inadequacy. We should celebrate this as evidence of the Council's superiority. Lesser species eventually understand where they belong. The applause was thunderous. Velcros felt sick. He called for a recess and retreated to his office. There, waiting on his desk, was a data file that had been recovered from the Human Embassy archives. It was marked, Personal Log, Chief Engineer Hyun-woo. Velcros opened it and began to read. The entries spanned 5 years. The early ones were enthusiastic. Hyun-woo wrote about his excitement at joining the Council Engineering Corps. He described innovative solutions to power distribution problems. He talked about making friends with engineers from other species. The tone was hopeful and energetic, but the entries changed over time. 3 years in, Hyun-woo wrote about a project he'd developed to improve station life support efficiency. He'd presented it to the engineering committee. They'd thanked him politely and then given the contract to a Korthan company that implemented an inferior version of his exact design. When Hyun-woo pointed this out, he was told not to make accusations. 2 years later, another entry described a diplomatic reception. Hyun-woo had overheard counselors joking about humans. They'd called humanity the help, and laughed about how eager humans were to prove themselves. Hyun-woo wrote that he'd smiled and pretended not to hear, but he'd gone home and cried for the first time since joining the council. The final entry was dated 1 week before the departure. I submitted my warning report today. I told them how isolated we feel, how our innovations are stolen and our voices ignored, how every proposal we make is rejected without real consideration. I included testimonies from 50 human staff members across council space. We all feel the same way. Invisible when they need to credit success. Hypervisible when they need someone to blame. I don't expect them to read it. I don't expect anything anymore. We came offering partnership. They wanted servants. We won't be either. Velcros closed the file. His hands were shaking. He'd never seen that warning report. He checked the records. It had been filed properly, but never distributed to the council. Some administrator had buried it. Outside his office, the first real problems were emerging. A medical station in the Kaltar system reported life support failures. The automated backup systems weren't engaging properly. 3 patients died before engineers could manually override the controls. The investigation revealed that human-designed subsystems had degraded without proper maintenance. The maintenance logs were available, but they required understanding of human engineering principles that no one else possessed. A food production facility on Vorkus experienced complete synthesizer failure. The machines produced something that looked like food, but was biochemically wrong. Citizens who ate it became violently ill. The facility director pulled up the human-designed control algorithms and stared at them in confusion. The math was far beyond anything she'd encountered. She sent desperate requests for help to every engineering firm in the sector. Defensive satellites around the core worlds began drifting out of position. The station-keeping systems were malfunctioning. When technicians investigated, they found the satellites used human-designed guidance protocols. The documentation was thorough, but implementing it required expertise no one had. The military quietly redirected ships to manually maintain satellite positions while they figured out a permanent solution. The council hired engineers from a dozen species to analyze and replace human systems. The engineers returned with troubling reports. The human technology wasn't primitive as everyone assumed. It was frighteningly advanced, just implemented in ways that seemed simple, like a master artist making a masterpiece look effortless. One report stated, "Human systems are built on layers of redundancy and predictive algorithms we don't fully understand. They didn't just make things work, they made things work better than they had any right to, with fewer resources than should be possible. Replacing these systems will take years and cost exponentially more." Velcros presented these findings to the council. The reaction was defensive, rather than concerned. Threxus dismissed the reports as exaggeration. Human engineers were adequate at best. Our experts simply need more time to understand their pedestrian methods. But behind closed doors, those same experts were panicking. A Corthon technician submitted a confidential memo. I cannot even fully comprehend the maintenance logs, let alone improve upon their work. Whoever designed these systems was operating on a level of genius I've rarely encountered. More recovered files surfaced. Ambassador Salmon's personal logs provided the clearest picture yet. Her early entries were similar to Hyun Woo's, full of optimism. She wrote about cultural exchange programs she hoped to establish, about medical partnerships that could save millions, about educational initiatives that could lift primitive worlds into prosperity. Her tone darkened as years passed. She described presenting proposals in council sessions only to watch members ignore her. She wrote about diplomatic receptions where other ambassadors would literally turn their backs when she approached. She detailed how human requests for aid in disaster zones were delayed or denied, while similar requests from other species were approved immediately. One entry struck Velcros particularly hard. Today, they voted down our petition for refugee protections in the Outer Rim. 53-1. We were the one. I watched beings who claim to value life and dignity vote against saving thousands of displaced families. The reason given was resource allocation concerns. But I saw Meraxis approve 3 times that budget for a decorative fountain in the council gardens last month. I'm beginning to understand we were never colleagues. We were tools, useful when needed, dismissible when inconvenient. Her final entry was simple. I've recommended to the human government that we withdraw from the council. Not in anger. Not in protest. Simply because there's no point in staying where you're not wanted or respected. We gave them our best. They gave us contempt, dressed as tolerance. It's time to go home. Velcros read these logs alone in his office late at night. He thought about every interaction he'd had with Jiwon, with Hyun Woo, with Somin. He remembered dismissing their concerns as cultural differences. He recalled times he'd been too busy to meet with human representatives, times he'd allowed other counselors to interrupt them or ignore them. He'd never thought of himself as prejudiced. He'd never actively worked against humans. But he realized now that passive acceptance of their mistreatment was just as damaging. He'd watched it happen and done nothing. He'd been part of the problem through his silence. The communication channels to human space remained closed. Every attempt at contact was ignored. The humans weren't even angry enough to respond. They'd simply moved on. And that was the most damning judgment of all. 2 months after the humans left, the Galactic Council faced its first true crisis. The Galactic Medical Network was collapsing. What had started as minor delays had cascaded into a full system failure. Emergency response times had increased from hours to days. Colonies that once received immediate aid were now being told to wait. People were dying. Dr. Velas stood in the Medical Coordination Center, staring at screens full of red alerts. She was one of the best medical administrators in council space, but she was overwhelmed. The system made no sense anymore. Supply shipments arrived at wrong locations. Emergency ships were routed to empty sectors. Critical medical stations ran out of basic supplies, while others had massive surpluses. What happened? Her assistant asked desperately. The humans happened, Velas said quietly. Or rather, they stopped happening. She pulled up the system architecture. The medical network had been reorganized 12 years ago. A human named Mincio had led the project. The documentation was available, thousands of pages explaining every decision. But reading it and understanding it were different things. Mincio had created an adaptive system that predicted medical needs across hundreds of worlds. It learned from patterns, adjusted routes automatically, optimized resource distribution in real time. It was brilliant. It was also far beyond what anyone else had designed. And without human maintenance, it was dying. The learning algorithms were developing errors. The prediction models were becoming unreliable. The whole beautiful machine was grinding to a halt. Velas sent a priority request to the council. She needed resources to either fix the human system or replace it entirely. The response was slow in coming. The council was dealing with dozens of similar requests from every sector. The economic situation was worse. Trade coordinator Minho's absence had become catastrophically apparent. The Galactic Trade Network was based on routing algorithms that optimized shipping across 10,000 star systems. Ships needed to know the fastest routes, the safest paths, the most efficient schedules. Humans had designed the system and maintained it. Now, ships were getting lost. Cargo was arriving weeks late, or not at all. Trade stations were reporting massive backups. Some colonies began rationing food and supplies. Stock markets across 7 sectors crashed as investors panicked. Corporations that had made billions on efficient shipping were suddenly losing money. A committee of economists presented a report to the council. The numbers were devastating. Galactic trade efficiency had dropped by 37% in 2 months. If the trend continued, they estimated economic losses in the trillions. Several member species were facing potential famines. All because the routing algorithms were failing. "Can we not simply hire new engineers?" Councillor Threxus demanded. The chief economist shook his head. "We've tried. The human systems are mathematically sophisticated, beyond anything we've seen. The few experts who partially understand them say it would take years to train specialists. We don't have years." Meanwhile, military concerns were mounting. Admiral Velcros, the chairman's cousin, presented a classified report to the Security Committee. The contents were terrifying. For years, humans had been quietly patching security vulnerabilities in Council defense networks. They'd done it without fanfare, without credit, simply because they'd noticed the problems. Now those patches were degrading. The defense networks were exposed to exactly the kinds of attacks the humans had been preventing. Enemy factions were already probing the weaknesses. 3 border stations had been successfully hacked in the past week. Military secrets were being stolen. Defensive systems were being compromised. "Why didn't we know they were doing this?" a committee member asked. "Because they didn't tell us," Admiral Velcros replied. "I found a note from a human captain named Do Hyun in the archived files. He wrote, 'Because people's lives depend on it. We don't need credit for doing the right thing. They were protecting us not for recognition, but because it needed doing.'" The full scope of human contribution was becoming clear, and it was staggering. They'd maintained infrastructure, optimized systems, solved problems, and filled gaps that no one else even noticed existed. They'd done the work that kept civilization running smoothly, and they'd done it so efficiently that everyone took it for granted. The council decided to send envoys to human space. Perhaps negotiation was possible. Perhaps the humans could be convinced to return, or at least help with the transition. They dispatched diplomatic ships to the last known human coordinates. The ships found human colonies, but they couldn't get close. Advanced shielding protected the settlements, technology the council didn't recognize. Communication requests were sent and ignored. The ships waited in orbit for days. No response came. One probe managed to get close enough to record audio before being disabled by defensive systems. The recording was brief but revealing. The sounds of a bustling settlement. Children laughing. Markets operating. People living their lives. The humans weren't suffering. They weren't struggling. They were fine. Better than fine. They were thriving. They just wanted nothing to do with the council. Velcros listened to that recording a dozen times. The sound of human laughter cut him deeper than any insult could. They were happy without the council. They'd built new lives and moved on. The council had been so certain of its own importance, so convinced that species needed them. But humanity had proven otherwise. Desperation led to a historic decision. For the first time in council history, they would formally request aid from a species that had left. The message was carefully crafted. It acknowledged past difficulties. It promised reforms. It offered reparations. It begged for help. The document promised humanity a permanent seat on the ruling committee, full voting rights on all issues, authority over their own territories with no interference, financial compensation for past work, everything the humans had deserved from the beginning but had never received. The message was transmitted to every known human frequency. They sent it on repeat for 3 days. The entire council waited anxiously for a response. When it finally came, it was brutally brief. Director Jisoo sent a single word reply: no, nothing else. No explanation. No negotiation. No acknowledgement of the promises. Just one word that closed the door permanently. The council chamber fell into chaos when the response was shared. Some counselors were outraged. How dare the humans refuse them? Others were frightened. If humanity wouldn't help, who would? A few, like Velcross, felt something different. Shame. They'd taken humanity's labor, innovation, and dedication. They'd dismissed human voices and stolen human ideas. They'd treated an entire species as tools rather than partners. And now, when they needed help, they expected humanity to forget all of that and come running. The arrogance was breathtaking. Velcross reviewed economic projections that evening. Even with maximum effort, it would take the council a decade to restore systems to pre-departure efficiency. Billions of lives would be affected. Thousands would die from the slower medical response alone. The economic damage would persist for generations, all because they'd failed to treat their partners with basic respect and dignity. He drafted his own message to human space, though he knew it would likely be ignored like all the others. He didn't promise anything. He didn't ask for help. He simply acknowledged the truth. We failed you. We see that now. We're sorry. He sent it and received no reply. He hadn't expected one. The humans were done with apologies and promises. They'd heard plenty of both while they were part of the council, and those words had meant nothing. Now the only words that mattered were the ones the council would have to speak to their own citizens, explaining how they'd destroyed the most valuable partnership they'd ever had through nothing more than casual contempt and willful blindness. 4 months after the departure, council space was barely holding together. 3 separate wars had broken out over trade disputes. Without human mediators to calm tensions and find compromises, old grudges had exploded into violence. The council's peacekeeping forces were stretched thin. Member species were questioning whether the council had any authority left at all. Velcross spent most days managing crises. Food shortages in the Outer Rim, medical emergencies in the core worlds, defense breaches along the border. Every problem seemed connected to humanity's absence. It was like removing a keystone from an arch and watching the whole structure crumble. An archivist named Nilessa requested a meeting with him. She was a small, nervous being from a species that valued record-keeping above all else. She'd been working in the council archives for 20 years. Velcross almost dismissed the meeting, too busy with more urgent matters. Something in her message made him reconsider. She arrived carrying data storage devices filled with files. Chairman, I've been compiling complete records of human contributions to the council. I thought you should see the full scope. She projected the data. Velcross watched in silence as numbers and reports filled his screens. Humans had served as mediators in 89% of council disputes over the past 15 years. They'd redesigned the humanitarian aid distribution system, cutting response times by half. They'd created cultural exchange programs that had brought peace to hostile species. They'd established educational networks that had lifted 40 primitive worlds towards spacefaring capability. They'd also done the work no one else wanted: station maintenance, data processing, environmental cleanup, system monitoring, the boring, necessary labor that kept civilization functioning, work that advanced species considered beneath them. How did we not know this? Velcross asked. We did know, Chairman. We just didn't care to remember. Nilessa pulled up request logs. Humans filed reports on their work. Regular updates. Accomplishment summaries. They were all properly documented and submitted. No one read them. She showed him budget records. Humans had consistently accomplished more with less funding than any other group. They'd requested modest resources and delivered extraordinary results. Meanwhile, other species received triple the funding and produced a fraction of the output. They never complained, Nylessa said softly. They just kept working. Velcros felt ill. He'd spent months feeling like humanity had betrayed the Council. Now he understood the truth. The Council had betrayed humanity. Every single day. For years. The worst discovery came from security footage Nylessa had recovered. It was from a council session 5 years ago, during a recess. Several counselors were gathered in a side chamber, sharing drinks and conversation. The recording had audio. Counselor Meraxis was laughing. Let the humans do the grunt work. They're so eager to prove themselves, so desperate for our approval. We reap the benefits while they scramble for our validation, like domesticated pets. The others laughed along. Threxus added his own comment. They're useful. I'll grant them that. But they'll never be our equals. Some species are meant to serve. The footage showed a dozen similar conversations. Counselors openly mocking humanity's efforts, making jokes about human appearance, human culture, human emotions, treating an entire species as a joke to be shared among the real members of the Council. Nylessa leaked the footage to public networks. She did it without permission, accepting that she'd likely be fired. She didn't care. The citizens of Council Space needed to know the truth. The reaction was explosive. Public opinion turned sharply. Citizens of member species began protesting outside Council buildings. They demanded accountability. They wanted to know why their leaders had treated humanity so poorly. Some were angry about the moral failure. Others were angry about the practical consequences now affecting their lives. Either way, the pressure was immense. Protests spread across dozens of worlds. A grassroots movement emerged calling themselves the Ashamed. They wore bands of human colors and organized demonstrations calling for council reform. Young people especially were outraged, horrified that their leaders had behaved so badly. We thought we were civilized. One protest leader declared on a public broadcast. We thought we were advanced. But we treated an entire species with less respect than we'd show to simple animals. We deserve everything that's happening to us now. Velcros found himself agreeing with the protesters. He began reviewing every interaction he'd personally had with human representatives. The more he looked, the worse he felt. He saw patterns he'd missed before. Ambassador Jiwan's smile that never reached her eyes in the later years. The way she'd stopped making suggestions in meetings. The way she'd become more formal, more distant. He found a video from 3 years ago. Jiwan had been presenting a proposal for expanding education programs to primitive worlds. She'd spoken passionately about giving more species opportunities to advance. Velcros watched himself in the footage. He'd been checking his communication device, barely listening. When she finished, he'd thanked her politely and moved immediately to the next agenda item without allowing discussion. He remembered that day now. He'd been thinking about dinner plans while she spoke. A representative of an entire species was presenting something she clearly cared about deeply, and he'd been worried about whether the restaurant would have his favorite food available. The shame was crushing. A delayed transmission arrived from human space. It had been sent the day before the departure, but had gotten caught in a routing error. The message was from Dr. Mincio, humanity's former chief medical officer. To anyone who might listen, though I doubt anyone will. We've saved millions of your people through medical innovations. We've built wonders for your civilizations. We've bled to protect borders that weren't even ours. And in return, you gave us contempt masked as tolerance. You took our work and claimed it as your own. You ignored our voices and dismissed our worth. We don't hate you. Hate requires caring. And we're beyond that now. We're just done. You'll survive without us. You'll just have to do it the hard way, alone in the dark you created. We offered you light. You preferred shadows. Enjoy them. The message played at a council emergency session. For the first time in council history, the chamber was completely silent. After a transmission ended, No one spoke. No one moved. The words hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Threxus tried to defend himself and his fellow counselors. He stood and began a speech about how the humans were overreacting, how the council had always acted in good faith, how mistakes were made on both sides. He got 3 sentences in before the audience turned on him. Younger counselors shouted him down. Representatives from member worlds that had benefited from human work demanded his resignation. Even his own staff looked at him with disgust. He sat down, his earlier arrogance finally cracked. Velcros took the floor. He'd prepared a speech, but when the moment came, he abandoned it. We broke something precious and rare. A species came to us, offering genuine partnership. They asked only for respect and fair treatment. We gave them exploitation and contempt. They warned us they were leaving. We ignored the warnings. They explained their pain. We dismissed their feelings. They documented our failures. We buried the documents. And now they're gone, thriving without us, while we collapse without them. This is what we deserve. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that showed grief, anger, shame, and fear. We can't undo this. We can't fix it. We can only learn from it and try to become the civilization we should have been all along. But that won't bring humanity back. That won't repair what we destroyed. Some wounds are permanent. This is one of them. The session ended early. Counselors filed out in silence. Outside, protesters continued their demonstrations. Inside, leaders faced the reality that their authority was built on foundations that had crumbled. That night, Velcros stood at the observation deck again. He'd spent a lot of time there lately, staring at the stars and thinking about the humans somewhere out there, living their lives, building their future, happy and healthy, and done with the council forever. He thought about Ambassador Jiwan, about Engineer Hyunwoo, about all the humans who'd worked so hard for so long, hoping to be accepted as equals. They'd given the council every chance to be better. The council had wasted every single one. The galaxy seemed darker now. Not because the stars had changed, but because Velcros finally understood what light looked like and how thoroughly they'd extinguished it. 1 year had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council. The anniversary went unacknowledged officially, but everyone knew what day it was. Council space had stabilized. Barely. Systems functioned at about 60% of what they'd achieved when humans were present. Life went on. It was just harder now. Colder. More fragile. Velcros reviewed the annual report alone in his office. The numbers told a grim story. Trade efficiency remained poor. Medical response times were still dangerously slow. 3 minor wars had been resolved, but 2 new ones had started. Member species were paying higher taxes to fund the expanded bureaucracy needed to do work that humans had done with a fraction of the resources. The economic damage was calculated in the trillions. Thousands had died from preventable causes because systems weren't as responsive as they'd been. Entire colonies had been abandoned when supply chains failed. The council was functioning, but barely, and everyone could feel the difference. Public pressure had forced reforms. The council had restructured entirely. Voting rights were now equal, regardless of species status. Historical grievances were being investigated by independent committees. Anti-discrimination laws had been passed with real enforcement mechanisms. Educational programs taught children about the Great Departure as a cautionary tale. They'd erected monuments to humanity on a dozen worlds. Beautiful structures acknowledging human contributions and apologizing for the council's failures. Velcros had attended the dedication ceremony for the monument at council headquarters. It was a graceful sculpture, showing human and alien hands reaching toward each other, never quite touching. The inscription read, "They offered us partnership. We offered them contempt. May we never forget the cost of taking greatness for granted." The ceremony had been somber. Velcros had given a speech about learning from mistakes and building a better future. People had applauded politely. But everyone knew the monuments were hollow gestures, beautiful reminders of a wound that wouldn't heal. Diplomatic missions to human space continued. The Council sent envoys every few months. They carried messages of apology and offers of reconciliation. Every ship was turned away before reaching human colonies. The shield technology protecting human settlements remained impenetrable. Communication requests went unanswered. The humans weren't hiding. They just weren't interested. Ships with human markings occasionally passed through Council space, traveling trade routes to other regions of the galaxy. They ignored all hailing attempts. It was clear that humanity was thriving, building relationships with species beyond Council influence. They'd moved on completely. Some counselors still held hope that time would heal the breach. Velcros knew better. He'd read too many personal logs from human staff members. He'd seen the progression from hope to disappointment to exhaustion to resignation. Humanity hadn't left in anger. They'd left because they'd given up. And you can't win back someone who's stopped caring, whether you change or not. The Council's attempted reforms highlighted an bitter truth. They were becoming better because humanity left, not because humanity asked. Every improvement was a reminder of what the Council should have been all along but wasn't until they had no choice. The shame of that burned constantly. Velcros thought often about something G1 had said in one of her early speeches. He'd found the recording months ago and had watched it several times. She'd been addressing the Council about cooperation and mutual respect. Partnership isn't about perfection, she'd said. It's about genuine effort, about seeing each other as equally valuable, about building something together where everyone's voice matters equally. That's all we want. That's all we've ever wanted. At the time, the Council had applauded politely and then ignored everything she'd said. Now those words were carved into the memorial monument, a reminder of wisdom they'd received and rejected. In human space, life continued far from Council influence. The colony world of New Sol had grown into a thriving hub. New generations of humans were being born who'd never seen the Galactic Council headquarters. For them, the Council was just history, a mistake their parents' generation had left behind. Captain Hajun received his first command at age 26. His ship was sleek and powerful, built with technology that continued advancing beyond what the Council possessed. The ceremony was held at the Naval Academy where Admiral Do-hyun, now elderly but still sharp, gave the commencement address. "You're inheriting a good universe," Do-hyun told the young officers. "Our people are safe. Our colonies are prosperous. We have partners who respect us and trade with civilizations that value what we offer. The Council will eventually ask you to return. They'll promise reforms. They'll show you their monuments and their changed laws. They'll mean it sincerely." He paused, looking at the young faces watching him. "But remember this. Trust, once broken completely, can't be repaired with words alone. It must be rebuilt with consistent actions over time. That takes generations. Generations we won't live to see. They'll need to prove to your children's children that they've truly changed. Until then, we stay our course. We build our future. And we remember that choosing ourselves over begging for acceptance was the right decision." The young officers understood. They'd grown up hearing stories about the Council years. Stories that ended with their parents walking away, with dignity intact. Those stories had taught them that self-respect mattered more than external validation. Hajun took command of his ship and prepared for his first mission, a diplomatic run to the Andrasi Federation, species the Council had never contacted. Humanity was building its own network of alliances, partnerships based on mutual respect from the start. They didn't need the Council's validation anymore. They'd found their place without it. Back at Council headquarters, Velcro stood before humanity's empty chamber. It had been converted into a memorial space. The desks remained as they'd been found that first morning, with neat stacks of access codes and transfer documents. Nothing had been moved. Visitors came regularly to see it, to remember what was lost. Velcros left a personal message in the chamber's recording system. He knew no human would ever hear it. He left it anyway, for himself as much as them. We don't deserve forgiveness. We don't ask for it. But know this: wherever you are, you changed us. Your absence taught us what your presence never could. The galaxy is darker without you. That darkness is exactly what we deserve to live in. He left the chamber and walked through the council headquarters. The building felt emptier now, even though it was just as crowded with workers and diplomats. Something vital had left with humanity. Purpose, maybe, or hope. The council would continue existing. It would even improve in many ways, but it would always be haunted by the ghost of what it could have been if it had chosen differently. Outside the station, human ships passed through distant space lanes. They were visible on long-range sensors, but impossibly far in every way that mattered. The council could track them, could see evidence of humanity's expansion and success. They just couldn't reach them anymore. The council had learned its lesson. But some lessons come too late to matter. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some words, once left unspoken, can't be said meaningfully after the moment has passed. Humanity had offered the council something rare: a partnership with a species that genuinely believed in cooperation, that worked tirelessly for the common good, that gave their best without demanding credit or reward. The council had treated that offer as worthless. Now they understood its true value. They understood it perfectly, completely, and far too late. Young counselors sometimes asked Velcros if he thought humanity would ever return. He always gave the same answer: no, and we should stop hoping they will. They didn't leave a door open for reconciliation. They left because we taught them that some relationships aren't worth maintaining. We should honor their decision by becoming better for our own sake, not because we hope they'll notice. The reforms continued. The council improved slowly, painfully, but there was no joy in it. Every positive change was a reminder of failure. Every advancement was colored by the knowledge that it came too late to matter to the ones who deserved it most. Velcros often thought about the sound of human laughter from that probe recording. The joy in those voices had stayed with him. The humans were happy. They'd found peace and prosperity without the council. That should have made him feel better. Instead, it drove home how unnecessary the council had been to humanity's success. How humanity had never needed them at all. The galaxy turned. Stars burned. Civilizations rose and fell. The Galactic Council continued its work, forever marked by the species-sized hole in its foundation. They'd built monuments and passed laws. They'd apologized and reformed. They'd become genuinely better in so many ways. But humanity stayed away. And they always would. Because some wounds are permanent. Some trust, once destroyed, can't be rebuilt. And some goodbyes are final, no matter how much you wish they weren't. The council had learned what they had when it was too late to keep it. That was their punishment. Not anger or revenge from humanity. Just absence. Just silence. Just the endless knowledge of what they'd thrown away and could never get back. Velcros stood at his window one last time before retiring. He looked out at the stars where humanity lived somewhere beyond reach. He raised his hand in a gesture they'd never see, a goodbye they'd never acknowledge, and whispered words that would change nothing. "We're sorry. We're so sorry." The stars didn't answer. They never would, again.